For those of you who've just checked in, we're at the top of the hour now, and my name is Evan Edwards. I'm Director of Strategic Partnerships and Business Engagement for Project Equity. And as I mentioned a couple minutes ago, with our co-founder, Hilary Abell, I'll be leading this webinar today. I want to start by thanking you for attending, being a part of this. I don't think it's overstating it to say that it feels like we're living through a couple of pivotal chapters in a history book right now, and no one can be blamed for having their attention elsewhere. So we're particularly appreciative that you made time to participate in our employee ownership webinar today. I'm going to take us through the agenda first, the first agenda items, I should say, with a focus on some of the benefits of employee ownership and the work that we're doing at Project Equity. Then I'm going to hand the baton to Hilary, who'll discuss some of the great impact employee ownership delivers. You see, we're a photogenic group. So let's get started. To put this all in perspective, we're at a pivotal moment in U.S. economic history where baby boomers, who own the vast majority of small and medium-sized businesses, are retiring in the next 5 to 15 years. This presents the opportunity to transition these businesses and the economic value they provide to ownership by employees, who are often already trusted stewards of these operations. To begin with, one of the great benefits of employee ownership is the ownership culture that is embraced by the workforce. That ownership culture helps to drive higher productivity, as illustrated on this slide. So how do we get to employee ownership? Well, we achieve employee ownership through an employee buyout. Now that does not entail, I repeat, that does not entail workers having to raise capital or borrow money directly to buy the business. Rather, these are transactions that are leveraged buyouts, funded largely by a combination of CDFI lenders and the seller note, and with no personal guarantee obligation to the employees. Rather, the debt to buy the business is serviced through the business's revenue on a going forward basis. So, employee buyouts deliver what I like to call a win-win-win. They benefit business owners, workers, and the third winner is communities that, by retaining businesses, retain jobs and economic vitality. Owners can achieve a market rate sale. Essentially, in selling to one's employees, the business owner doesn't necessarily engage the friction that they might in selling to an outside buyer. Workers, and through ownership culture, tend to stay at companies in which they're employee owners, hence longer job tenure. And of course, longer job tenure leads to higher family net worth. So I'd like to pause here. We have a little poll. I know that there's a number of business owners who are in the audience today, and we want to see where they are in their exit planning. And so no one's excluded. I'd like to ask the non-business owners in the audience who may have a friend or relative or acquaintance who is a business owner to weigh in as well. So please take a moment and answer the poll, and we'll share the results with you on the other side. Okay, hopefully we've all had a chance to think about this and we can move on. Looking forward to seeing what these responses are on the other side. So today's challenging environment. Challenging might be an understatement at this point. This is a unique moment, obviously. I'm sure everybody's aware of that. What the current crisis laid bare is that 97% of pre-crisis employment figure was a mirage of sorts, and that so many jobs were in the gig economy or were otherwise not quality jobs, and thus weren't supportive of workers' economic resiliency. Project Equity sees the opportunity for employee ownership to be key in a reimagined economy going forward. But how do we get there? We understand that a number of small businesses are struggling right now. And so as part of the innovation that we're engaging in, we want to support business continuity through the crisis. Once we're able to get small businesses through the crisis, we want them to be viable and therefore have lending options that provide for forgiveness of all or part of the loans once the business can be up and running again at its regular pace. Project Equity's mission. So I want everybody to please take note of the portion of our mission that states that we'd like to demonstrate and replicate strategies that increase worker ownership. Toward replicating and bringing to scale employee ownership, Project Equity has partnered with a number of localities, including Los Angeles County, Whatcom County in Washington State, the city of Berkeley and San Francisco, Miami, Florida. And essentially, these partnerships allow us to engage with economic development leadership in these cities and help them to identify what we refer to as legacy businesses, those that are owned by business owners that are on the cusp of retirement, and those that we identify as retention risks. And in identifying those businesses, we're then able to engage with those business owners and introduce employee ownership as an exit or succession opportunity. And of course, with it, the opportunity to keep jobs in the local economy and move workers into more quality jobs. So this goes without saying, working people are not economically secure. The statistics are pretty daunting. Small business employs 47% of the workforce and only have 27 days of cash available on average. 46% of U.S. families cannot manage a $400 emergency expense. 6 of 10 fastest growing occupations pay less than $27,000 a year. So there is an expectation that unemployment will be for the long term. When I say unemployment, probably in the double digits. I think we're at about 20% right now. The ability to move the needle below 10% would be pretty challenging. And so our effort is flattening the curve for small businesses as well. So many of you in the audience may be familiar with the silver tsunami. The silver tsunami basically reflects baby boomers who, again, are at the cusp of retirement and the great numbers that they represent, particularly as business owners. In effect, the retirement presents opportunity because, as I stated earlier, as these business owners retire, we have the unique opportunity to transition ownership of small businesses and the economic resiliency that they offer to workers to worker ownership. And we do this all while providing these retiring business owners, again, with a market value return on their investment in their business over years. So as I mentioned earlier, Project Equity has partnered with a number of localities. One of our most significant and important partnerships is with the city of Long Beach, California. In addition to the city as our partner, our funding partner is City Community Development, and we're also partnered with LISC Los Angeles in our work. The city of Long Beach understood that being a manufacturing and port city and having an outsized number of baby boomers as part of their business owner population, it was incumbent upon the city to develop a strategy that would accomplish two things: retain the businesses in the local economy, and also a means to provide greater equity to the workers at those businesses. Project Equity's analysis identified 2,500 businesses in Long Beach operating 20 years or more. Now, these businesses only account for 18% of Long Beach's total business population, but they account for a third of employment, and they account for 63% of the revenue produced by businesses in the city. Essentially, what this says is that loss of these businesses and the jobs that they provide would have a tremendously significant impact on Long Beach's local economy. On the other hand, preserving these businesses and transitioning them to ownership by the workers presents a pretty unprecedented opportunity for these workers to have business ownership and share in the value represented by business ownership. Selling a business is not easy. And in particular, in the current market, values for businesses are pretty depressed valuations. And so what's a business owner to do? Our research indicates that only about 20% actually sell, those that are listed with business brokers or on various platforms. And we also know that only about 15% of businesses transition within families nowadays. So combined, that's about 35% of businesses that actually find some sort of succession. This leaves the other 2/3, 65% of businesses with no succession opportunity, at least not a readily apparent one until now. Employee ownership represents a great opportunity for retiring business owners to, again, sell their business, achieve some return, preserve their legacy, and reward their long-term employees by allowing them to purchase the business, retain their jobs, and achieve the benefit of business ownership. So let's take a pause here and see how y'all responded. So about half of the folks taking this poll are just thinking about succession. Hopefully, our presentation today is helping to shape your thoughts. And of course, we're glad to engage with any of the business owners or a friend of business owners in the audience to provide more information. Project Equity does consults with business owners at no cost all the time, and we're of course happy to speak with you. Let's see, 30% fully transitioning and exiting in the next 2 to 5 years. You all should definitely be on speed dial with us after this. And never exiting. Sure, I'm sure a lot of people feel that way these days, whether by choice or by not. That's great. Thank you for taking our poll. So let's move on here. So understanding your succession benefits. So if you look here at this slide, we're illustrating the different means by which a business owner may choose succession. You can sell to your family members, and that of course preserves legacy, but still leaves in question whether you're going to get a market value return for the business, whether you'll see certain tax benefits that are available for selling to employees, and whether or not your employees will be retained. An acquisition, whether that may be by a regional buyer or a private equity firm or whatever the case, does not necessarily lead to preservation of legacy, doesn't necessarily mean market value will be retained. Tax benefits may or may not, retention of employees. And if you close down operations, obviously, you don't achieve any of these. Employee ownership, however, checks all the boxes. So how do we get from a legacy business owner to employee ownership? Well, the first step is exploring the fit. So again, the 50 to 80% of you all who took the poll and are either a business owner or know a business owner who has some interest, then I might advise that you would want to explore the fit and understand more about employee ownership, certainly more than Hilary and I can express in this brief webinar. The next step is assess the feasibility. Is employee ownership a solution for you and your business? So project equity during our feasibility assessment process takes a detailed view of your business, everything from financials to operations to governance. And at the end of the process, we are able to render an evaluation that allows you as the business owner to understand if your business is a good fit for employee ownership transition. The next step is the actual transition. How will the employee-owned business work? So our transition process takes anywhere from 9 to 12 months. And through that process, we work on various issues of negotiating a sale, doing any training of staff for their roles either in governance or operations, if there's any shift in operations. And basically, Project Equity's work is about assuring that the business will be successful as an operating entity going forward. And then, of course, we close the sale and fund the transaction. Now, the final step in our work is what we refer to as our Thrive program. And through Thrive, Project Equity stays engaged with the transition business for up to 2 years, providing consultation and support and ensuring that the newly formed worker-owned business is successful. So for those of you who are inclined to want to understand a little bit more into the weeds as to how these transactions work, this slide gives you a representation of a deal. and each circumstance will be unique. And so if you are interested in a transaction, then please speak with us, and we can talk to you more about your particular circumstance and how it is that you might achieve liquidity if you're in a circumstance where an earnout is relevant. We can guide you into understanding how you might achieve a particular level of tax savings, and then what your total financial benefit would be on the other side of the transaction. So again, to summarize the advantages, a market value sell. So you as the business owner receives market value for your business. Delivers significant tax advantages. The level of these tax advantages are subject to individuals' personal tax circumstances, but in general, tax advantages are available. The third item, owner can control the process. That's very important because as a business owner, if you're selling to a party other than your employees, that party may have other priorities, whether it be a fast transaction to meet their strategic objectives, or they may want to drag you, the business owner, through a long transaction process, hoping to have you come down on price. When you sell to your employees, you can control the pace of the transaction and meet your needs and your timeline. Financing is flexible. As you saw from the prior slide, there's generally an outside lender, a seller note. The percentages of the two notes can be variable. And then last, strengthens local economies. I'd like to point out that this is particularly important. We see as small businesses leave local economies, they sometimes render those economies less viable. And so employee ownership is really important, keeping economies strong and vibrant. So we have a little challenge here. And for this, I'd like to throw it over to my colleagues. And then I will see you again on the other side briefly. Thank you for your time this morning.
Thanks so much, Evan. And this is Jason from Project Equity. Normally, I am behind the scenes, but today I have the opportunity as we're sharing time with you today, to take you through the Project Equity Challenge. First and foremost, thank you so much for your engagement thus far today, and keep those questions coming throughout the presentation. Yaka and Jim are there to respond, and we'll be flagging several of them for our Q&A near the end. So right now, we're going to go through something a little bit different. We're going to ask you to go ahead and play along at home with the challenge. It'll be a short true and false adventure. Keep track of your own score, and with that, let's begin. So question 1, and this is an easy one. True or false, selling to employees requires a seller to accept a lower selling price. This is false. The transition process includes a fair market valuation, which is the selling price, which ends up being the selling price in the final transaction. In question 2, the employees are going to have to foot the bill of the sale. This one is also false. Employees won't finance the transaction. Usually the transaction will be financed through a leveraged buyout from future revenues of the business. And in fact, Project Equity, as a joint program initiative called Accelerate Employee Ownership, works to increase the availability of financing capital for employee-owned transactions. All right, question 3. And this one is a concern that we often hear with the owners that we work with. Is it true or false that owners can remain involved in the strategic direction after the sale of their business? This one actually is true. Owners work with the transition team to determine the role they will play in the new ownership structure. Importantly, you may exit on your own terms and the timeline that works best for you. Last one, question 4. All employees will be managing the business equally. This one is tricky. It's, however, false. While employees share ownership responsibilities, management at employee-owned businesses functions much the same way as a privately held company and would remain in place to ensure smooth operations even after the transition. Well, how did you do? Raise your hand if you got at least 3 of the questions right. Now keep them raised if you got 4 out of 4 right. Well, thank you very much for kind of sharing that short intermission with me. And no matter the score, hopefully you learned something new. Thanks for playing along, and I'm happy to throw it back over to Project Equity's co-founder, Hilary Abell, a key driver in Project Equity's service innovations and a passionate advocate for employee owners. Hilary?
Good morning, everyone, for those of you in California, and good afternoon for folks in other parts of the country. Thank you, Evan and Jason, so much for this great presentation about how employee ownership can help business owners find a viable and satisfying succession plan. As Jason mentioned, I co-founded Project Equity 6 years ago with Allison Lynn Gaines. And as Evan shared, our mission is to scale employee ownership for the benefits and to do this together with low-income communities and with a special focus on workers of color in order to create a more resilient economy for all of us. So I'm going to step back and talk with you over the next 15 minutes or so about some of the benefits that employee ownership offers to our society as a whole and to all of us, with a good focus on the workers in these companies, but also sharing some of how we can all benefit from advancing employee ownership. I'm going to start by sharing some stories and then some statistics. This is a company called Recology, based in San Francisco, that is a shining example of what employee ownership can do for communities and for the environment. They are the primary waste service provider, waste management company for the city of San Francisco, and increasingly for communities up and down the West Coast. They've expanded in recent years throughout California, Washington, and Oregon. And they are also on the cutting edge of moving California to a zero waste economy. So they call themselves a resource recovery company, not simply waste management. So they do a lot on composting, recycling, as well as hauling our trash. Recology is a great company in many ways, and I want to share one of the things it's doing during the current crisis for its employees. It has a program called Recology Recovers, through which it's paying all of its employees their full salary and benefits, even if they are not able to provide full schedules for them. So you'll see from some of the data I'm about to share and some of what Evan has already shared that there is really solid data that shows that employee-owned businesses prioritize their workers, and Recology is a living example of that. The next company I'd like to speak to is one that I've had the pleasure of working with closely throughout the years with Project Equity. They were one of the first companies that we helped transition to employee ownership, and they became a worker-owned cooperative in 2017 and have been part of our Thrive program over the last 2 years. The board of directors and the new employee owners of A Slice of New York voted within a year of transitioning to raise their wages. And fortunately, they had good financial advice from Project Equity as well as from their own analysis of their company's finances. They were able to do that successfully. And they also continued paying generous profit sharing. They had previously done that in the form of year-end bonuses, and they transferred that over to patronage dividends, which is what we call member profit sharing in a worker cooperative. This has tax advantages, so it generated more revenue for more profit sharing for the worker owners and some savings for the business as well. And this has amounted to about $300,000 a year for each of the past 2 years. Now, if you do the math, they have about 35 employees. This is many thousands of dollars per person. And I can't overstate how critical that is for folks in a low-wage industry in a high-cost area like the San Francisco Bay Area. So we're very proud of the work that A Slice of New York does. Now I'm going to talk a little bit more from the data side. I've had the pleasure over the last couple of years to have a chance to refresh my own knowledge. I've been involved with employee ownership for more than 15 years, sorry, not more than 50, more than 15 years as a worker owner myself in an employee-owned company and as a developer of worker-owned businesses since 2003. So I've seen up close the benefits of employee ownership, and drafting this paper gave me the opportunity to look at the evidence base again and the significant new evidence in recent years for the benefits of employee ownership. As Evan's described, they're very powerful for the businesses themselves: higher growth, better productivity and profitability, longer firm survival, and longer employee retention. And there's many community benefits that come from that. And I'm going to talk you through some of the benefits for employees. As we've mentioned, employee-owned companies do tend to pay their employees better. The chart here is in the paper and shows that in visual form. And just a couple of statistics I'd like to mention. There was a large study of more than 1,000 workers in worker-owned cooperatives across the United States that was done in 2017. And the majority of them reported earning more than in their previous jobs and earning more than people in similar companies to their understanding. And the authors calculated that additional earnings for hourly workers at $2 more per hour, which is, meaningfully significant in lower and middle wage industries. In another common form of broad-based employee ownership are ESOPs, employee stock ownership plan companies. And one study of ESOP companies showed 53% higher incomes among those employees. And finally, I'd love to share an anecdote from my own experience in my prior nonprofit, where we were developing home cleaning businesses that were worker-owned with low-income immigrant women in the San Francisco Bay Area. We had a very rigorous measuring system, so I can tell you that this data is very, very real. And the first year we measured it, we found that the women in these cooperatives were increasing their family incomes, not just their own. Their own incomes were doubling and tripling, but family incomes were increasing by 40%. And the last year we measured it, they were increasing by 80%. So I don't know if any of you have ever had that experience of having your family income go up that significantly. Very few of us had. And of course, it was a very empowering opportunity and an opportunity to start getting not only stability, but actually building some wealth for these lower income workers. It's very significant in today's environment of high unemployment, recession, and possibly even depression. We're not sure where the economy is going to go. To note that employee ownership has been documented to employee-owned companies lay people off much less frequently than their peer companies that are not employee-owned. This data looks at the last, several years, including the last Great Recession. So if you look at the third set of bars here in 2010, employee-owned companies were almost 4 times less likely to lay people off. And this means that these were very high numbers of jobs that were retained, people who were not unemployed. And a different study has calculated that the federal government, by not having to pay unemployment and other benefits for those people in employee-owned companies, saved $37 billion in 2010. Not an insignificant sum. So it's helpful to remember in our current economic crisis that employee-owned companies are statistically proven to not only treat their employees better, but also to save the government money. Finally, I'd like to touch on wealth building. We're all very aware of income inequality. I think fewer people are aware of wealth inequality, which is very, very deep. Even the stats on that are even worse than income inequality and are especially bad across different racial groups. This is data from a study that was published last year, funded by the Kellogg Foundation and done by researchers Janet Boguslaw and Laura Schur, that looked specifically at employee owners who were low and moderate income workers and across different racial and ethnic groups. And you can see the breakdown here comparing median wealth of single US workers with the median retirement account of the people in the survey. So it's dramatically more in every case for these employee owners than it is for the median worker in their category. And I'll just use one example. If you look at the second line, Black men have a median wealth, single US workers who are Black men, of $300. These Black male participants in the study had ESOP accounts, meaning their employee ownership share in their company is structured as a retirement account in ESOP companies of $180,000. And additionally, they had 401k accounts. So employee-owned companies, in addition to providing ownership in their own company, are also more likely to provide diversified retirement portfolios for their employees. So in this case, these participants had 52,000 401ks for a total retirement savings of more than $230,000. So dramatic, maybe an understatement, but really exciting and real data showing that employee-owned companies are building wealth for the workers who have the least of it. I'd like to share with folks data that you may be aware of, but just to emphasize the point made on the last slide and to speak a bit to the current moment, the racial wealth gap, especially between Black people and white folks in this country, is highly dramatic. There are similar statistics across white and Latino and other groups as well. Just to use this one example, white families have, on average, 10 times the wealth of Black families. And the poverty statistics, as you can see, are also dramatically different. This couldn't be more critical for us to understand and to lift up as something that is quite built into our economy and is one of the facets of the systemic racism that so many people are speaking out against today, and that we all know we need to change. So I'm very grateful to know that employee ownership, I've seen it directly with the folks of color that I've worked with in employee-owned companies, and now we have data to show that it's a very real way to fight and to change the racial wealth gap. Now, hopefully, all of you who've been listening are somewhat inspired and better informed. And I'd like to just speak a bit to how everyone on this call and just about everyone we interact with day to day can support the expansion of employee ownership in this country. So, for example, if you work for a government, Evan has mentioned some of the local government work that Project Equity is doing with city and county officials in different parts of California, also in South Florida with Miami-Dade County. And we're also doing quite a bit of work at this point with government officials in the state of California, trying to get supportive policies for employee ownership to be part of the recovery from this current crisis. And there also is a federal legislation called the Main Street Employee Ownership Act that passed in 2018 that advances employee ownership and mandates the Small Business Administration and the Small Business Development Centers around the country to educate and support employee ownership. So any government official really, or elected or staff, can support policy efforts. Even aside from any policy opportunities, can engage any part of your ecosystem that supports small businesses to reach out to business owners. And if you have any loan funds or loan guarantee programs, there are sometimes barriers to employee-owned companies accessing those that are not hard to remove. It just takes some effort and some will, and we can make more capital available for employee ownership that way. If you are part of a workforce development board or interact with the workforce development system in any way, it's helpful to know that there's something called rapid response programming within that system, where the workforce development infrastructure needs to respond to possible layoffs, to respond rapidly and help avert layoffs. And one of the possible uses of that funding is to fund employee ownership feasibility studies as a way to keep companies going and to transfer ownership over to the employees. So accessing that funding, helping to get those feasibility studies to happen, and like with anyone else, you can educate the many business owners you're in touch with, and you can serve as what we call candidate spotters or referral partners. I believe there are folks on this call who work with small businesses in your communities in all kinds of ways, nonprofit organizations and others. If you're a professional service provider, I would put you in this category as well. Same thing. We would love to have your partnership in referring interested business owners to those of us who work specifically in employee ownership, can answer their questions, help them assess whether it's a fit for them. We would love for you to be educating business owners about the need for succession planning and about employee ownership. And of course, especially in today's extremely challenging economic environment, many companies need business advice, coaching, retooling in order to respond to the changing economy and to get through the crisis, of course. But many of those businesses are going to look different on the other side. So Evan spoke a little bit about a new initiative Project Equity is hoping to get off the ground to make business continuity loans available to companies that would like to commit to an employee ownership transition once they get through the crisis, and those loans could potentially be forgiven when they execute that commitment. So that's a new initiative that we are getting underway with several partners. And part of that would be to have the right kind of technical assistance to retool the business. So small business support organizations can be part of that. Investors, of course, can provide capital for employee ownership transitions and for the types of business continuity loans that I was just mentioning. And we hope to see more investors. We may be expanding our own fund, Accelerate Employee Ownership, in the future, and we are welcoming conversations with investors who would like to be part of the innovation and this business continuity front. If you're a grant maker, I believe we have some on this call who have been supportive of employee ownership. And if you interact with the philanthropic community and folks who have not yet been supporting employee ownership, please let them know that philanthropic support has been critical to the acceleration of the uptake of employee ownership that we're starting to see now, and will be critical to making this win-win-win solution available to be a greater part of our economy. One of the things I'd like to point out is Evan mentioned our partnership with the City of Long Beach and with LISC LA and with City Community Development. So that partnership is funded by City Community Development, a philanthropic entity or part of the corporation that gives philanthropic contributions. And that work would not have been possible at this time if it weren't for that support. We have seen other cities and counties invest their own money where they're able into this work, which is critical, and we hope to see more of that in the future. But it's just not viable right now for more local governments to do that because they're facing such budget crises. So we would love to see philanthropy help to fill that gap and to help government become more engaged with employee ownership, and also to provide loan loss reserves for the types of loan programs we've been speaking about. If you're a business owner, I think it's pretty clear what you could do next. Please do consider employee ownership as a way to sustain your business, and contact us for a free consultation. And tell your friends about employee ownership as well. So just to summarize, and then we'll have some time for questions and answers and discussion. As we said, anyone on this call can be a referral source for Project Equity and other organizations like us that help companies assess and implement employee ownership. So it's helpful for you to know what we look for as readiness factors. First and foremost, we look for a strong business because we do want to create wealth for the new worker owners of this company, and so we need to transfer a profitable, strong company to them. We look for companies that have been profitable over 3 or more years. Of course, in the current crisis moment, we have to look at this a little bit differently because of the current moment, but we still are looking for companies that would have been profitable before COVID-19 hit, so 2019 and a couple of years before, and that have a pathway and a strategy for how they can be, if they're not profitable now, if they are now, that's even better. If they're not, how they can be profitable post-COVID. We do look for a minimum of 10 or 20 employees. It's not that employee ownership transitions can't work with smaller companies, and in fact, we have done some very successful ones with smaller companies. But it is true that there are sort of some additional challenges. And when you have a larger company, you have a larger team to help drive it forward. So we tend to look for businesses with 10, 20 or more, and we often work with companies with 50 or 100 employees or more. So send all of them our way. And finally, we do focus mostly on what we call legacy businesses. So those older ones that do have an outsized impact on our local economies in terms of the taxes that they pay, the jobs they've created. And we want to keep those going into the future. They're the ones most at risk, but younger companies can also be great transitions, but we generally don't recommend a transition strategy for a company that's too young, less than 5 years, for example. This is how you can contact us. It's easy to find the sign up for the free consultations on our website. And I'll just wrap up by summarizing some of the advantages as we've spoken about through the past 45 minutes. Employee ownership is a great option for business owners. It is by many considered to be a well-kept secret, and we're here to ask you to help us change that, because the more business owners that know about it, the more I believe we'll find it to be a really good option for them. Of course, employees gain a pathway to ownership through shared ownership of a business, which is business ownership being an important way to build wealth. communities keep their businesses and jobs. And I'm sure we all share in the understanding and the desire to create a more inclusive economy, which is ultimately what this allows us to do. So thank you so much. I'm going to pass it over now to my colleague, Miyaka Cochran, to facilitate our conversation.
Thank you so much, Hilary. What a great amount of information and some wonderful education. And thank you also, Evan, as well. We're going to open it up for some questions here to take advantage of being able to have both Hilary Abell and Evan Edwards to answer some questions. So the question function is open on the webinar, so please feel free to answer any questions you have, and we will do our best to answer as many as we are able to now. Just to kick it off, we do have one question, and this is actually from a worker asking, from a worker's perspective who doesn't own their own business, are there any good lists or ways to identify employee-owned companies that we could recommend? How, as a worker who may be looking for a co-op or employee-owned business to apply to, how might they be able to get connected to something like that?
It's a wonderful question. There are many lists. The employee ownership community loves to, as much as we want it to not be such a well-kept secret, the employee ownership community does love to connect with people and to advocate for employee ownership and connect to each other. So you can find resources, lists of worker-owned cooperatives on, I believe it's the U.S. Federation of Worker Cooperatives, usworker.coop, where you can find a list of worker cooperatives across the country. And the National Center for Employee Ownership is a great source of information about ESOP companies around the country. And yeah, your local community employee ownership advocates would be able to point you directly to some great companies as well.
Yeah, that's great. And so here's another great question as well, is someone saying that we seem to focus more on exiting, but do we help small businesses develop a plan on how to give new employees equity as the company grows? So if an owner is not wanting to exit, can they still work with project equity and transition? I think
you're on mute, Evan.
Sure, I'll take that one. So there are three options the business owner has. There is sell and exit, sell and phase out, and sell and stay on. So as a business owner, if you are interested in moving on from your business, you have other things that you'd like to do with your life at the time, and then you're fine to sell the business and exit immediately. What we find favorable both to many business owners and to the business itself and to the workers is if the business owner stays and phases out over a period of time. The transition period provides for a healthy transition for the business. It also helps a business owner who has done something for 20 or more years in their life to be able to transition into their personal life. The third option is a business owner can actually sell the business and stay and remain as an employee owner with her or his former staff who are now colleagues. Business owners can participate in governance or they can choose not to. They can be a worker and be a part of electing the board that would operate the company, that would govern the company going forward. Either way, it's flexible. Another advantage of employee ownership in these transitions is business owners have quite a bit of flexibility in how they want to move forward.
Great, that's excellent. So another question we have is, do we support the development of employee ownership trusts?
We do, yes, I can speak to that. We absolutely do. We're very excited about the employee ownership trust model. I first learned about it about 5 years ago when it had been done a number of times with companies in England and the UK, and maybe had been done just once in the United States. And many of us working in employee ownership have embraced it as a third option to worker cooperatives and ESOP. And it's a very flexible option. It does not have the tax advantages that ESOPs have. and it doesn't have built in the democratic governance that worker cooperatives have, but you can actually build in the democratic governance, and you have a lot of flexibility in the trust model. So companies like Recology is an ESOP, but companies that have a triple bottom line and really want to put at the forefront their environmental mission, in some cases have chosen a trust model to kind of balance the different priorities of employee ownership and environmental sustainability as one example. It's an exciting new development, I would say.
Excellent. Okay, and let's just, I think we have time for one more quick one. There's a lot of great questions, and if we didn't answer your question, we'll make sure to follow up with you offline. Also, feel free to reach out to us if there are questions that maybe come up afterwards. We're happy to be able to connect with you to answer those questions, discuss the content of the webinar further, or help you in any other way that we can. So to wrap it up here, here's a good question: is can cooperatives be combined with nonprofits?
I'll speak to that, having worked with both for a long time. There's two directions I could take that question. One is, could you have a cooperative type of practice within a nonprofit? And the answer to that is yes. Nonprofits are not owned by anybody. They are, tax exempt for the public good, governed by a board, but not owned by anybody. But they can have both democratic governance practices. When I was an employee in a nonprofit years ago, I was an elected employee representative on the board, which would be an example of the type of practice that you see a lot of in a co-op. And there's also a pretty broad discussion and growing interest in worker self-directed nonprofits, I believe is the term, where more of sort of democratic management and worker participation in strategic decisions is practiced. And our friends at the Sustainable Economy Law Center are a great place to go for information on that model. The other thing I would say, much of my experience prior to Project Equity was in a nonprofit that actually was incubating worker cooperatives and starting them up. And we had a really rich, multifaceted relationship with the cooperatives that we started. And it was strategically designed to help those co-ops succeed, even though they were businesses that were owned by their workers. So there's a lot that one could say in a conversation about how cooperatives can help with worker cooperative development as startups, and also with, as Project Equity does, with developing worker cooperatives and other forms of employee-owned companies by advocating for transitions and other approaches.
Great. Yeah, great question too. Well, we're going to wrap up here, but don't leave yet, because when the webinar ends, there's going to be an excellent video from one of the owners who we actually completed a transition, and he's going to be able to speak a bit about what that transition was like, as well as what it was like to work with Project Equity. So I want to thank you both, Hilary and Evan, so much for a great presentation and being able to share all this wonderful information with us. And for the attendees, thank you for joining us today. We look forward to connecting with you in many different ways, whether you're an owner who's interested in doing a consultation with us, you're someone who's interested in employee ownership collaboration, maybe as a business connector and you work with businesses, or maybe you're just curious. And whoever you are and whatever your reason, we're happy to chat with you. So feel free to reach out, sign up online for a consult, and I'm happy to do a call with you. Thank you all very much, and have a wonderful rest of your week. Thank you, Hilary.
Thank you. Thank you to everybody. And I'd just like to say thank you to Evan, Miyaka, Jim, and Jason for putting on this webinar. Thanks to everybody for participating. And please do send folks our way for a consult on employee ownership. And please do download our new white paper, The Case for Employee Ownership, at project-equity.org/whitepaper, and spread it widely to folks in philanthropy and government who can help support this work.
Excellent. And we've just put that in the chat for everyone as well. Evan, thank you. And any final words you'd like to share?
Just appreciate the attendance. Thanks very much, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you all, and have a wonderful rest of your day.